It's happening. Tell me about when you were in the Billfish tournament when you were in the Air Force in the 60s. What year was it?
66. Yeah. I was in the Air Force. I've been in the Air Force, I guess it was my third year, maybe into my fourth. And I worked on communications equipment. But my sergeant was named Perry, and we were good friends. And I was a diver by this time. Sergeant Duvall had already adopted me, and I dived all the time. I dived every week, hunting for seashells. So anyway, Perry had made arrangements for us to be the Air Force team to represent the Air Force in the Hawaiian International Billfish Tournament. At Hickam Air Force Base, we had two converted PT boats that were used for going out and fishing for whatever, marlin, whatever. And it had two captains, one on each. And those two guys were going to be our crew. And we rented this rotten wooden boat, 30-something foot, in Honolulu. They were thinking about buying it. It was only like $3,000. It was rotten. It was old. It was diesel. And they rented it, and then we were going to go to Kailua Kona on the Big Island. It's 200 miles from Honolulu. Perry he worked off duty at the NCO club. It was a part-time job. And so he had absconded with, I think he had 17 cases of beer that he brought and 50 to 100 New York strip steaks. And he had all this stuff. I took my scuba gear just a little bit. That's probably just one tank.
How many people did you have for 17 cases of beer and 50 steaks?
There was the two captains. One was acting as a deckhand, and then there was two fighter pilots that were, Vietnam guys. The war was going on then, and me and Perry. That was it. And of course, I was the youngest, and we had trouble when we left. We had trouble from the start. It was supposed to be a 19-hour trip, but it took us 40 hours. And we hit something within an hour or two out of Honolulu, and it knocked a hole in the side. It was leaking pretty bad. I remember bracing some stuff against inside there to slow that down, which was all right. So we headed on, and we stopped at Lanai to get more fuel, which was probably, I don't know if I was halfway on the trip or not, but Lanai at the time was owned by Dole Pineapple, and there wasn't any tourist stuff or nothing there. But we pulled up to a dock, a workers' dock, and got fuel, and the locals came down with the boxes of pineapple, and I thought they wanted to sell us pineapple. They didn't want to sell us nothing. They just gave us all these pineapples. We had several boxes of pineapples, and then the trouble started after that. We got into big waves, 45 feet waves in a 32-foot boat. We had a lot of trouble. The waves promptly broke all the windows, the forward windows out, and we took the plywood from under the bunks and put that in there so the waves wouldn't just come straight in on us. We had problems from the start. We called after some of the problems, and we were taking on lots of water, and we called the Coast Guard while everything was still working. Of course, they never found us. Hawaiian billfish tournament is a big deal. I guess it's the biggest deal there is for sport fishermen, people catching those big marlins. So it was a big deal for them, not for me. I didn't care. I was just going for the adventure. But we then had a fire after they'd called the Coast Guard under all the wiring burnt up. So then the radio didn't work, and no lights worked, and nothing electronic worked, and we didn't even have any light to. If somebody had looked for us, they couldn't have seen us because there was no light, nothing electrical on the boat worked. The let's see. Yeah, after that fire, scuppers on the deck of a boat. You have holes in the back where the water that splashes in runs out these holes. Those are called scuppers. The scuppers on this boat were packed full of rags, and they were, instead of being way up above the water level outside, they were like a foot down. We were floating through the water, mostly sunk, and just going through it, the waves like a log. And every wave you saw was like, what's the name of that movie?
Perfect Storm.
Yeah, it was like that. And except we didn't have a good boat like they had, although they all died. But anyway, we'd go through the waves, and it'd break over us, and just every wave was like that. And it was bad. While we were in this huge channel, this is all at night. And we just kept going along in the diesel engine. When I first went on the boat and I looked down there was, the gray diesel engine down there, and there's a 5-gallon bucket that you could go sit on and work on things. Well, later on, when we had to look in there, as we were nearing the end and coming out of these big waves, the island of Maui blocked the waves. So it blocked the waves so we could head on towards the big island without having big waves. This is at night, and we already have all the damage. We're basically sinking, and can't communicate or anything. But then we are going to sink because the big bilge pumps both had burned up from pumping water out, and we were fixing to sink. And it was sort of panic time for people. I was too young to panic. Perry was terrified. He was scared to death, wearing his life vest all the time, which all of us should have been one. The 2 fighter pilots couldn't care less. They obviously were used to being challenged. So they weren't any help, but they also were not afraid of anything. And the 2 captains, I think the older captain figured we was going down, but the younger captain had a boat sink under him in Florida before, and he came up with an idea for me to do. And I didn't know nothing about boats, but I was the only diver, and I had my stuff. And so we took a flashlight and looked in the bilge, and down there now the water is like 3 feet deep. It's halfway up the sides of the diesel engine. Its diesel is still running, of course. We couldn't have recranked it if it had quit. There was no way. So anyway, when you looked in there, and all this gray, oily water is in there, and in it is 24 packs of Pall Mall cigarettes. That was what Perry, his 2 cartons of cigarettes had busted. They were floating in there, and about 30 pineapples were floating in there, and that 5-gallon metal can was floating in there, and what the other captain, the one that was acting the deckhand, he suggested that there was a way to use the engine as a bilge pump. So what we did, he was trying to tell me what to do, which I didn't know anything about how you cool the engine, but you have a through hull, and it was about 2 inch, and the water is pumped by the engine in it and through a heat exchanger in the engine and then back out. This is what keeps the engine cool. It's a major league amount of water going through there. And he said, for me to put on my gear, this is probably the first dark water dive I ever made. Of course, you can't see or anything. He's telling me what's going to feel like under that engine, and for me to find these hoses, I have to make sure I have the right one. And he gave me this serrated knife, and this is a reinforced hose. I wasn't taking off hose clamps, and I'm going to cut this hose. And so I got down there, and I didn't really know what I was doing at all, but I could feel the hose up under there. I was a little fella then, and I sawed that thing through. And the thing is, as soon as you saw it, if you don't close that, you can't close the valve until you saw it, because if you close the valve, the engine's going to overheat pretty quick. So I was sawing it and then close the valve to keep, because if you didn't close the valve, then the whole ocean's going to come in and sink you immediately. And then I cut it, and then this huge hose is sucking this gray water through the engine and using the engine as a giant bilge pump with filthy water and everything in it. But that got us, we were by then in the lee of Maui and headed on, and it's about dawn. Perry gets he's terrified. And he got a case of beer and went and sat on the bow of the boat and did not speak to us or anything after he sat there and drank that case of beer till we got into Kailua Kona. We were just limping in the water, and by this time the engine was getting screwed up too from pumping this filth through there. But we were still halfway afloat, just limping in, and we got to the dock at Kailua Kona. They had a fire engine sitting there, and they put a hose in the boat and pumped it for about an hour with about a 5-inch stream just shooting out, and got the boat floating again. But that was that was the first time I should have died and didn't. So it's all been gravy since then. And I'm not really afraid of much, but I was. That was just 19 years old. It was a great adventure, but I couldn't even tell that story for probably 10 years after it happened.
Thank you. What year was that?
66. Not 1966, not 1866. That's when I first learned to dive at Hickam.
I've always wanted to record that. This was a good chance to.
I'm glad you did. I think I told everything, pretty much.
All right.